Hi, everybody. It's Dr. Johnny. I'm very excited today to be talking to my good friend, Dr. Tom O'Brien. Very quick stuff on Tom O'Brien. I could talk to you about his credentials for an hour, but I know you want to get right to the gluten stuff. I will tell you that this is how we met. Tom, you remember this. Tom and I were the only English-speaking speakers who were invited to speak at the first annual conference on anti-aging in Sao Paulo, Brazil. And obviously we spoke to each other because we were the only ones there who spoke English. And Tom just gave one of the most brilliant presentations I'd ever heard. I think it was, I was so impressed with how smart it was, I forgot what it was about. But I think it was on, I think you were talking about curcumin and all of the different metabolic pathways that curcumin impacted. And then not too long after that, you kind of became known as the go-to guy on gluten. Can you tell us a little bit about how this came to occupy so much of your time, your research, and your clinical work?
Oh, you bet, Johnny. It started 34 years ago when my ex and I could not get pregnant. And I was an intern at the time, and I called the 7 most famous holistic doctors I'd ever heard of and asked them what they do. They all told me what they do. I put a program together. We were pregnant in 6 weeks.
What was it? What did they say? I'm very
Well,
interested.
everyone had a different approach. You know, there was no consensus on what to do. But as is true with all health conditions, there's a checklist. You know, if you're a clinician, you know, if someone comes in with a particular price, oh, I'll just give them this. That kind of thinking of a product for a symptom really is from the 1970s and 1980s. And the way it's the whole world of functional medicine that what we hope for our practitioners, someone comes in with a particular symptom, the first thing you do is say, why do they have that symptom? Why is it that that's occurring to them? What's the trigger underneath that? And so when I realized 7 different doctors all had 7 different approaches and they said they were successful, I said, okay, and so I just did a checklist. And our neighbors in married housing heard about that. We lived on campus at the time. And they asked if I'd work with them. And they had been through artificial insemination and nothing had worked. And I said, well, I don't really know what I'm doing, but I don't think it's going to hurt you. And they were pregnant in 3 months.
Wow.
So I've worked with a lot of infertility, a lot of recurrent miscarriages. And there is a checklist. You know, but there's some things that, there's very few things that I say always. But this is one of them, that when there are hormone imbalances or hormonal dysfunction, always there's some type of food sensitivity that the immune system is responding to. And the immune system, when it responds, it causes inflammation. And as you know, all degenerative diseases, all dysfunction, if it's not a trauma, an acute trauma, they're all inflammatory at the cellular level. There's always inflammation. So what I realized was one of the things you have to do always in hormone-related cases and in almost every other case is stop throwing gasoline on the fire. And foods, if you're sensitive to a particular food, it's an inflammatory response that the body has. And so you're throwing gasoline on the fire. You're causing more inflammation. And you take these nutrients that are really good nutrients, but you're still eating dairy if you have a sensitivity to dairy or soy or whatever it is. So you try and take all these vitamins, you feel a little better, but you're not quite there yet. Always look to, is there a food? And what I found in my practice that the most common food sensitivity is to gluten, head and shoulders above everything else. And if you test correctly, you will be able to identify it.
So why is there such emphasis on this now in the health space? I mean, it's been around forever, as long as we've had wheat, we've had gluten. What does it do to the body? Why should we be concerned about it?
There's 2 components to that answer. The first one, the science is very clear. No human can digest gluten completely. No human. Now, wheat has saved millions of lives. Millions and millions of lives. If there's a famine in Africa, we ship a boatload of wheat over there. You feed tens of thousands of people and they stay alive. But so it doesn't kill them. But long term, it triggers inflammatory cascades. When you can't break down a protein completely, you break it down into peptides. Think of protein like a pearl necklace. Hydrochloric acid undoes the clasp of the pearl necklace. Now you've got a necklace. And our enzymes are supposed to be scissors that can cut off each pearl, called an amino acid. And the amino acids go right through the intestinal wall into the bloodstream. Then bodies use it to make new bone, new muscle, everything like that. But what happens with gluten, no human across the board can digest gluten. We just don't have the enzymes to cut off each pearl. So we cut off chunks of pearls, a 33 chunk piece, a 17 chunk piece. And these peptides are inflammatory. They cause inflammation in the gut. And that inflammation triggers intestinal permeability. The slang term is leaky gut. And then you get the whole systemic problem that occurs from that. That's the first part of the answer, is that no human can digest wheat. The second part of the answer is that it's not usually enough to, now every time you eat wheat, you cause a tear in the covering of the intestines. I say it's like a cheesecloth. Every time you eat wheat, you cause a tear in the cheesecloth. That's intestinal permeability. But the fastest growing cells in the body are the inside lining of the intestines. Every 3 to 7 days, you have a whole new lining to your intestines, the cover. It's like the skin of a snake. You know, we just shed it, make new cells, make new cells. So you have toast for breakfast, you tear the cheesecloth, you make new cells. You have sandwich for lunch, you tear the cheesecloth, you make new cells. You have pasta for dinner, you tear the cheesecloth, you make new cells. Croutons on your salad, tear the cheesecloth, make new cells. A cookie, tear the cheesecloth, make new cells. Day after day after day after day. But at some point, for some people it's 2 years old, for some people it's 52 years old. At some point you cross the imaginary line and you can't heal anymore. And when you can't heal anymore, it's called loss of oral tolerance. We can't tolerate this inflammatory food. When you lose oral tolerance, now you get the pathogenic intestinal permeability, the leaky gut, and now you start getting the systemic problems wherever they're going to show themselves. So it's a loss of oral tolerance. No human can digest this. It causes inflammation, tears the cheesecloth for everyone, but we heal. But at some point, and that loss of oral tolerance, this is really critical, and your doctors don't know this yet. There have been many papers on this, but it's not common knowledge. The loss of oral tolerance is because there are so many toxins that we're exposed to every single day of our lives now. Never before in the history of humankind have we been exposed to so many toxins in so many different arenas, with the food, with the beverages, every day, tons and tons of toxins, and your immune system has to fight all this stuff. So the one that you're taking in 2, 3, 4 times a day, that's the most common food, which is gluten, that causes the inflammation. At some point, your immune system's just worn out. It can't compensate for it anymore. Now you have loss of oral tolerance. Now you get the leaky gut. And now you pull at a chain, it breaks at the weakest link. It's at one end, the middle, the other end. Your heart, your brain, your liver, your kidneys, wherever your genetic weak link is. Once you go systemic with the inflammation because of the tears in cheesecloth, wherever your weak link is, that's where you're going to feel the symptoms of a gluten sensitivity. For some people, it's your skin. You get acne, you get psoriasis, you get dermatitis. For some people, it's your brain. You get a foggy brain, your kid gets seizures or attention deficit, migraines. For some people, it's their muscles. You're sore all the time, you ache. And it just depends on where the weak link is as to where it's going to occur. So if I can summarize that, the protein, our bodies can't break it down completely. So you get these clumps of pearls called peptides. They're inflammatory. They cause inflammation, tears the cheesecloth in the gut, but we heal. Tear the cheesecloth, we heal. Tear the cheesecloth, we heal. But at some point, you don't heal anymore. Now you have this leaky gut, and now it goes systemic. And wherever the weak link is, that's where you're going to start getting the symptoms.
So if I understand this correctly, I think I do, the gut really is ground zero for everything that comes into the body. And
exactly
if that protective wall, that cheesecloth, as you call it, that a fence, you might think of it as a fence that has some, holes in it. If things start to be able to get through that barrier that aren't supposed to get through that barrier, they get into the bloodstream where they don't belong. The body doesn't recognize them and therefore mounts some sort of a immune response to them, and that's where all the trouble starts. Is that an accurate retelling of the story?
That's right on the money. Just one thing.
Okay.
The body does recognize it. The immune system recognizes it and says, this is a foreign invader.
This is a foreign invader. So, okay.
This is
it
not good
doesn't
for me.
belong. It doesn't belong.
It doesn't belong there.
So
Now,
would that be why we see so much variety in the symptoms to these
exactly.
foods? And they're all over the map. I mean, you mentioned ADD. I mean, there's probably 100 different things that can be made worse by this reaction to gluten if, in fact, that cheesecloth is damaged.
Wherever your genetic vulnerability
Mm-hmm.
is, and it's called antecedents, the things that have happened to you in life. So if you have a lot of mercury because
Mm-hmm.
you're eating too much tuna,
Mm-hmm.
and mercury deposits in the brain and the nervous system, so your nerves can be on edge. That may be the weak link in your chain. That's an antecedent caused weak link, so that your symptoms are in your brain
Mm-hmm.
because of the mercury that's there. And so you eat wheat and you get foggy brain, you just can't think clearly, or you get headaches. It might be your brain, it might be your liver, it might be your heart. It could be anywhere.
So quick question now, to play devil's advocate, many people, a lot of our vegan friends and people who are very pro-grain will say, well, people have been eating this stuff for years. Not everybody's getting sick. I mean, not everybody's good. Is this just a fad? Is this just now all of a sudden a trend that we see gluten-free everything? Or is this really something that we just haven't noticed before and it's been slowly eroding our health for decades and nobody's just noticed it?
That's a really good question. So if you eat something and you feel sick right afterwards, or an hour later, or 2 hours later, you start thinking, oh man, what did I eat? How come I feel like that? And we can make the direct connection. But if you eat something and you don't get stomach symptoms, and the next morning you wake up with a migraine, you don't think, what did I eat yesterday that triggered this?
Mm-hmm.
We don't think that way.
Mm-hmm.
We just don't connect the dots because it's too far away from where we think the symptoms are going to be.
Sure, sure.
That's why we don't correlate the symptoms with the
cause.
food we ate.
Sure. And also there's a delayed reaction sometimes too. It's not like the classic, a lot of people, we have this, I'm sure you've been present to many of these debates when we have with classical allergists, and they say, oh, they're not allergic to these foods. And we say, well, that's true because allergy is very narrowly defined, and defined that way is a very specific immune response. Probably less than 5% of the people have it. But when we define it more as one of these diffused reactions, the body's saying, I don't like this stuff. Maybe it happens 13 hours later. Maybe it doesn't show up as a RAS test in your allergist's office. These things are very hard to detect because they're time delayed, aren't they?
That's exactly right. The delay can be as long as 8 days. If you have an autoimmune response, it takes about 8 days for the immune system to get kicked in and to raise the antibody load high enough to where it's measurable. And that's when you start getting the symptoms. It can be 8 days later, and there's no way you'll ever make the connection with the croissant you had 8 days ago. You just won't think of that.
I want to ask you something that my friend Bill Davis, William Davis, the cardiologist who wrote that wonderful book, Wheat Belly, said. He said, eat gluten-free, but he said, be gluten-free, but don't eat gluten-free. And I think what he meant was a lot of these gluten-free foods that people are now eating in an attempt to not introduce gluten into their diet are junk foods that have had the gluten removed. It kind of reminds me of the old fat-free days when they would send the worst junk food you could imagine, but they took the fat out. What do you think about gluten-free foods? Are they a step in the right direction, or are they just more of the same junk food with one bad ingredient taken out?
They're a step. They're not the road to health, but they're a step. Look, we're humans. We aren't perfect, you know? You decide to give up gluten, so you stop at the coffee shop every morning on your way to work, you get your coffee and a blueberry muffin, but now you're not going to have the blueberry muffins because you're gluten-free and you're feeling better. And you go to your coffee every morning, you get your coffee every morning, and you just look over this, no, I'm not going to have that. And every morning, no, I'm not going to have that. And then one day you see a little sign that says, gluten-free blueberry muffins. So you say, oh, great, I can have that, it's healthy for me. As a matter of fact, I can have two. I'll get one for later. Yeah. It's not healthy for you. It's just paste. There is no nutrient value to eating gluten-free carbohydrates.
Right.
But we're human. So who cares if you have a blueberry muffin once in a while? Who cares? As long as it doesn't have cross-contamination and have wheat in it. But you have a blueberry muffin once every couple of weeks. Who cares? You're human.
Right.
But don't eat this stuff every day. It's like my godmother would say, "What's the matter for you?" that you think it's
Exactly.
okay
Yeah.
to eat this stuff. It's not healthy for you.
Yes, I
It's
got it.
just not as bad for you.
It's just not as bad for you. Very well put. Now, I want to talk just for a couple minutes before we go about the Gluten Summit, because you organized. I actually don't know as much about this as I'd like to. You organized a kind of a summit of some of the greatest experts in the field, all talking about, now I imagine not just gluten, but a lot of related subjects like the gut health and the fact that the gut is considered the second brain. So much of serotonin is produced in the gut, and so therefore there's a connection to mood. And I mean, a lot of things start in the gut. It's really ground zero for a lot of things that happen in the body. And this summit, tell us about the Gluten Summit, because I know a lot of people who are watching and listening to this would love to get some of this information and get it clearly from experts.
Yeah. So if you think you have celiac disease, the test that's done is an endoscopy. There's a blood test, but if you get the official test, a tube down your throat, and they look at your intestines to see about the shags that are there, shag carpeting down there. If the shag's worn down, that's celiac disease. And they also snip out a little piece, and they look at it under a microscope. And the classification report that you get is Marsh 1, Marsh 2, Marsh 3, ABC. It's technical stuff. But I went to Oxford, England, and I interviewed Marsh, the godfather of all of this.
Wow.
He had never been interviewed, Johnny.
Wow.
He was in his 70s, and he had never been interviewed. And we spent the whole day together. It was just marvelous. He walked me around Oxford, and Tom, this is the hall I walked down to receive my medical degree.
Wow.
Oh, Professor Marsh, that's lovely. You know, it was a great day.
Okay.
I interviewed the godfather, and I asked, and then Bologna, Italy, Professor Umberto Volta, the godfather of non-celiac gluten sensitivity, has over 400 publications in the medical literature on this. Tel Aviv, Israel, Yehuda Schoenfeld, Professor Schoenfeld, who, this is his best credential, 27 of his PhD students that studied under him now chair departments of immunology in hospitals and medical universities around the world.
Now, you interviewed these guys for the Gluten Summit?
I interviewed these guys and there were 29 total.
Wow.
I went to the real experts and I said, Professor, I read your paper that you published in 2011 on this topic. And where you wrote this, did you mean? Yes. And does that mean? Yes. Do you hear that, people?
Right.
Here we have the godfather telling you that that osteoporosis, 80% of people with a sensitivity to gluten develop osteoporosis.
Now are the interviews technical? Because these sound like very academic professors. I mean, is this something that everyday people can actually understand and benefit from?
Well, yes, that was the value of it, that I asked the questions. The question a little bit technical, but I said, do you hear that, people? What they said is, and then I translated into everyday language.
Oh, yeah, which you're so good at. Which you are so good at.
Thank you. And the result was we had 118,000 people that attended. Now it's over 200,000 people that have viewed the Gluten Summit. And I received literally 18,000 emails. And I had a staff of 8 working 10 hours a day for weeks to answer the emails. And, you know, every day now, people come up to me. They see me. I was having breakfast yesterday with a friend, and someone walked up and said, excuse me, I recognize that voice. Are you Dr. O'Brien? And I said, yes. She started crying.
Wow.
She said, we had 2 miscarriages in a row and decided not to try again and rather to adopt. But then we heard your Gluten Summit where you talked about your history and then you talked about the science behind this. We decided to do exactly what you said for a few months just to see how we felt. And we got pregnant and I had a healthy baby. Our daughter was born 3 weeks ago.
Did they name him Tom?
It's a girl.
I know.
But that kind of thing happens all the time.
Wow, that's amazing. That's amazing.
The Gluten Summit is 29 hours of the experts in the field, and we transcribed all of it, so it's 600 pages that you can download if you want to. And there's over 1,000 slides if you like to look on your computer while you're listening to it. So what we tell people is listen to it while you're cooking dinner.
Yeah.
Listen to it when you're driving in your car.
And I'll
And
bet you a lot of people are able to take some of that information back to their doctors, because doctors are really semi-clueless about this, aren't they? They just know celiac or not celiac. The whole huge continuum in between having a diagnosable disease and having, degrees of sensitivity to something that can really totally disrupt your health. That's not something that's really on their radar at all, is it?
well, it's not, Johnny, because the textbooks from 10 years ago, 15 years ago talked about celiac disease as a disease of the gut.
Right.
And you look all bloated and you're really skinny because you're not absorbing vitamins and minerals. And what we now know, and so the doctors believe that. So if you don't come in, you got big bloating problems and you have abdominal pain, they think, oh, you don't have a problem with gluten, because that's the way they were taught in school 10, 15 years ago. What we now know is that for every one person that has gut symptoms, there are 8 that don't with the gluten sensitivity. It's in their brain or in their kidneys or in their heart or their muscles, that the symptoms are outside the gut. So, and my job and what I'm doing is I'm educating healthcare practitioners all over the world. We're in 11 countries now. I certify doctors and healthcare practitioners as certified gluten practitioners. And we have about 400 of them now around the world in 11 countries. And I want 5,000.
Good
I
for
want
you.
our doctors educated and our nutritionists educated on this so they know how to look for it, they know how to test for it. And so the Gluten Summit is the cutting edge information in everyday layman's language to understand the magnitude of this and how it might manifest, and then what to do about it.
It's great.
How do you take care of it? How do you test for it? And then what do you do? How do you transition?
Okay, and on my website, there'll be plenty of information about how to order the Gluten Summit and find out more about it. Will be links. We'll put all kinds of stuff up like that. Tom, thank you so much. Every time I talk to you, I just want to be greedy and keep you for an hour or two, because I have a list of questions, and I know you are just the man when it comes to not just this, but really so much stuff that has to do with functional medicine and how all of this stuff works together to really create optimal good health. And you're the living proof of it. Every time I see you, I ran into you down in Palm Springs at the JJ seminar, and you're in the peak of health, and you look great, and you've got energy, and you really walk the walk, and you've helped so many people. Thank you so much for spending this time with me. I appreciate it greatly.
Oh, thank you, Johnny. It's a real pleasure to be with you. Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.